Good evening, everyone. We are continuing on our little study in the book of Malachi or Malachi, basically meaning my messenger. And in chapter 2, where we left off yesterday, God is continuing on this homily, this rebuke of the Kohanim, the priests, and reminding them that they are to represent God correctly. They are to represent God properly, that they are to hear his commands, to make the right decisions, to teach the right things. And hence, when we come to verse 6, this was where we left off, that the Torah is what they are supposed to teach. And the Torah has no injustice. It's very sound, it's very just. And in this whole concept of using Levi as a third party to teach them, that they had a covenant with God to do this right thing, to teach the law of God. And in so doing, they would be able to walk with God in shalom, in peace and justice, and also turn people away from avon, from perverting the Torah. And that was where we left off. And God was reminding them that there is a prior covenant that God made with Levi, and now as descendants of Levi, they are to honor that. It's a very special relationship. It's a very special covenant, and they are not to take it lightly. Now in verse 7, it says, for the lips of a priest. Now notice, there is a juxtapose between all the priests and now addressing a single priest as an example. It's more of a way of speaking to tell them this is what a priest should always do. The priest should protect the knowledge. Now the word keep here is shamar. Shamar means to guard knowledge. Now, knowledge, as we have seen in the book of Deuteronomy, in the book of Proverbs, and we would know that in much of the cases, knowledge here refers to the Torah. This is not about knowledge of science and accounting and commerce and psychology. This is very much the knowledge of God's word, God's instruction. And that the people, and it says that they would seek the law from his mouth. Whose mouth? The priest's mouth. Now the word seek here is to how should we say, to search and know the law. And by law, it's the Torah. And so what we are seeing here is that the priest is to teach the Torah. And that is what God is holding them to, where this entire passage is a reminder that Levi, as a covenant with God, all his descendants are in charge of teaching the people to walk right before God, because these are the people who know what to do before God. Then he is the messenger of the Lord of hosts. Now this word, verse 7, is malach, right? Malach. And the idea here, this is messenger, and Malachi is my messenger, and the Levi, the priest, the Kohen, right? The Kohen is the messenger of the Lord. Now, very seldom do we think of the priest in this particular role, mainly because we have always been engrossed by always linking the priest to the temple rituals. And it's not wrong, but it is incomplete. And so in the book of Malachi, the messenger of God is the one who teaches the Torah, who imparts the knowledge of God's instruction. And so here we have an A and a B. And so that is the role of the priest, which is, well, I guess seldom talked about. But at this time, after they came back from Babylon, they are now looking at the priests to guide them and to guard their knowledge and to make sure that they do not pervert that knowledge. But however, in chapter 1 and on to chapter 2, the priests themselves are the ones that God is having a trouble with. And if the priests have trouble with God, it would be right to think that whatever is communicated downwards are problematic. And God says this, you, the priests, have departed from the way. Now, the word departed literally means to turn aside. Remember, we always had this diagram, right? We are to walk the way of God. And if you walk away, that means that you are not teaching the Torah. And this is the direction of God. And if it goes this way, this is wrong way. And so this is what God has accused them of and held them responsible. And you have turned aside from the way. The journey that God wants the Israelites, or here the Jews, to go is led by the priests. And if that be the case, then we have a problem, because that would lead many to stumble at the law. Now, what does that mean? It means that people are tripping over. The idea here is they trip over. How do you say this? They fail, right? They fail the law. And by law, it is the Torah. And if a person doesn't know the Torah, and the person is thrown aside because they didn't know the Torah, and which means this, they're not keeping the knowledge for the people. And hence they have caused many of them to trip, to stumble, to fail at the Torah because they didn't teach it properly. The further accusation is this, that you have corrupted the covenant of Levi. Let's break this down. The word corrupted literally means to pervert, right? To pervert. They've perverted, they have spoiled the covenant of Levi. The covenant of Levi we saw is this: to walk in peace and equity, to teach justice and the law of truth. And if they don't do that, or they don't do that properly, then it would cause people to fail God. And that is the accusation that God has against the priests, you, right? Because in God's mind, the priest is supposed to be the messenger of the Lord of hosts, to bring the instructions of God to the people, to teach truth, to teach them justice, how to walk with God. You see, he walked with me, and to teach the people how to walk with God. Now, how does the priests know this? Because the priests would know the truth, the law itself, right? To teach the Torah, and that they too must walk in the Torah and lead the people to do the same. So the role of the priest is much, much broader than to just do the rituals of sacrifice and the feasts and festivals. That's how we are now told the importance of the role of the priests. And God says, because you have done that, I have made you contemptible and base. Now, the word therefore means as a consequence. Remember, God says you must hear me. That's a if then else, right? God is a fair God. God is a just God. God doesn't punish them just because God feels like it. God punishes them because God can show them that they have done wrong before God. And what does God want them to do? Continue to do wrong? No. The warnings that God has is such that it will be to help them see the right way and do the right thing. And so God doesn't do things arbitrarily. We need to recognize that the Lord of hosts is a serious God. And being a serious God, he means business. What rules he gave must be complied to. And that whole idea is important for us to realize that the priest themselves who knows very well is not doing that. And so as a result, in this consequence, God judged them. And so I have made you contemptible and base. Verse 9, the word contemptible actually means bazar. Bazar means something others would, well, how would you say, would treat worthless. When they treated God's name as worthless, when they treated God's altar as worthless, God is making you, the priesthood, contemptible and base. Base means low. Base means humble, humiliated, right? I think it would be a better word, humiliated. God is saying, because you are not doing your role, you are supposed to be the leader to teach them the Torah, the way of God, and yet you yourselves violate that. And in so doing, you treated God's name as worthless. And as such, you make people think that God is of no worth. And you humiliate God. You make God ashamed. And so as a consequence, God judged them and says, I'll do this to you, and let's see how you would like that. Before all the people, because you have not kept my ways and have shown partiality in the law. Now there is another role that is presented here in this text, where you find that the priests is not only a teacher of the law, of the Torah, they are also the judge by the Torah, because they know the Torah. And so what did God accuse them of is that they have not kept my ways. What do you mean not kept my ways? Not kept my ways, literally that they did not guard the way that God does things, right? My ways is the rules, the processes of God. They didn't do that. For example, with regards to offering an animal that is sick, that is lame, that is blind, treating the offering to God as worthless. Now, that's what it means by you have not kept my ways. The second one is that you have shown partiality in the law. What does that mean? Partiality means to lift face. To, how should we say, you would show certain people certain way of doing the same instruction, right? And that means that you have not been treating the law of God justly and fairly. Meaning everyone that God has described in the Torah needs to do certain things, and you treat some people more serious than others. You treat certain people with partiality, that they have to maintain a strict compliance and others don't. And that would be a perversion of the Torah. Now, God is holding them responsible because of what they have done. Notice, God doesn't judge them for what they have not done. God judges them for what they have already done. And so God can show them that they have shown partiality, but they have not kept my ways. So they didn't guard the rules of God, but they have chosen this to do and that not to do with regards to the law. And so they are also judged by God. You see, what we have seen so far is God has a beef with the priests, obviously, that we can see. And the beef that God has with the priesthood has a lot to do with their not showing fear of God. And by not showing fear of God, they disregarded the importance of the Torah of God. And by doing what is convenient and then doing away with some, and to some people do it, some people don't, that shows that they have not treated the Torah of God with respect. They have not treated God with respect. And the name of God is considered worthless because they can decide what to do, what not to do. You see, I'm just trying to help us understand, why is God so furious with the priests? And I hope that we can capture the essence of God's disdain with the priesthood. That the priesthood is not doing what they are supposed to do. In verse 10, the accusation is this: have we all not one Father? Has not one God created us? And this is to show the commonality. The commonality of the relationship with God. If all of them are created by God, that they have the same Father in the order of creation, that there is all coming from Adam, right? If you can take it that far back from the time of creation. So God is asking, this is the question: why do we deal treacherously with one another? That is the question. Remember, we always have questions to ask, and this passage now deals with this question: why do we deal treacherously with one another? And this we here would be all of Judah. And we could see this, all of Judah, not the priesthood anymore, all of Judah. Treacherously is a very, well, I guess in English, you find it a bit difficult to explain. The idea of treacherous is to act deceitfully. Now, what does it mean to act deceitfully? Now, that is an imagery here. The imagery is this. There is a cover, and what you can see up here, it looks okay. What is underneath is evil, is not okay. And that is treacherous. You're pretending to do something that you are not. You're pretending to be loyal when, on the other hand, you have done evil. Now, remember, evil means what is disagreeable in the eyes of the beholder. And so, in this segment, we must be very clear of this word, treacherous. Meaning, when you deal with each other, you pretend that everything is okay, but it is not. You lead the other person think that you are doing right, but you are actually doing the wrong things. And it says here, by profaning the covenant of the fathers. Now, the idea of profaning or defiling here basically means to violate, not comply, to dishonor, or to treat as common, like it's not an important thing. You know, that's the kind of concept, right? The word profane is to treat something as nothing important. All right. What is the nothing important? The covenant, the berit. The berit is a formal promise. The formal promise of the fathers. Now, there are two levels here, right? But I would say, in my opinion, the covenant of the fathers is at Mount Sinai, where they said everything the Lord says we will do. Now, that is the covenant. The covenant at Mount Sinai is the covenant where the Israelite, as a nation, has agreed that they will do what God says, and it's a formal blood covenant, and Moses spilled the blood over them, and that depicts a blood covenant, a very serious affair. It is not something to trifle with, and God is now bringing that back to their forefront of focus. Why do we act treacherously with each other? Means that we pretend that we are doing the right things in the Torah, but actually behind it, we are not. It's just pretending that under the covers, we are violating everything else. So that is the question that is being discussed here. So let's look at the idea of the treachery, right? The idea of treachery. Right now, it is after Judah has come back to the land. They have come back and rebuilt the city that God has designated that his presence will be. And they have rebuilt the temple. And so they are also doing the rituals that God has so instructed. But recall in the book of Ezra, not many people came back, right? There were only about 42,000 at one time. And actually, the number of people that came back was very, very small. And many of them are still out there. And that's why it says, from the rising of the sun to the going down of the same, my name will be made great among the nations, among the Goyim, because the people are still there. They're not back in Jerusalem. But who is back in Jerusalem? We have Zerubbabel, who led the charge of rebuilding the temple. And then we had the high priest, Yeshua. And the high priest and the priesthood is the one that is teaching the people the law now. But there is treachery. Judah has dealt treacherously. As an abomination has been committed in Israel. Israel as the nation. Right? Israel as a nation. And in Jerusalem. What is an abomination? Now, an abomination usually has to do with idolatry, right? Idolatry. It has to do with idolatry. It has also to do with adultery. And basically the idea here is it has also to do with marrying non-natives, I guess you can call it that way. Marrying non-natives, marrying the Canaanites, right? Marrying the Canaanites. And so it says here, Judah has profaned. In verse 11, profane means defiled, dishonored, violated, treat as common. I think we can use that word as well. Treat as common. When God instructs, those things are not common. Those things are particular. They are specific. They are not like, oh, let it be. If you like, you do. You don't like, you don't do. All right. And what did he treat as common? The Lord's holy. Now, this is not institution, right? This is not institution. So, in other words, it is known as profane the Lord's holy thing or holy one. All right. And I think this one here needs a little bit of retranslation. That Judah has profaned the Lord's, the holy one of the Lord, the Lord's holy thing or holy one, that he loved, not loves, that he, the word here is ahav, that he loved, right? That he loved. And then he has married. And the word married here comes from the word Baal. Baal means he has become the Lord, right? Become the Lord or master. Now, in the days of the ancients, right? The husband. Now, let me just back up a little bit. In today's terms, we have the term husband and wife. And that's a modern Western concept. In the ancient times, the husband is the man and the wife is the woman. And in ancient Chinese practice, I think many people also do that, right? If you look at some of the older generations. However, there is another name for the man who is the Lord of the relationship, and he is called Baal. And so when a man becomes a Baal of the daughter of a foreign god, now the word God here is El. And it leads us to two different imagery, right? To two different imagery. One imagery is that this is a daughter of a foreign god, and it's considered, how should we say, considered a religious association of a God that is not related to Jehovah, a God of the nations out there, a foreigner. And in this case would be, say, the Canaanites, and the daughter of the Canaanite gods, right? However, this word El also comes with a more basic understanding, is that These are all the mighty one, which means that this is a daughter of a chieftain, right? A daughter of lords and kings, right? And of princes, of the foreigners. And so it gives us a picture of one marrying a deity, or two, marrying non-Jewish women. All right. The more common understanding is that this word God shouldn't be translated as God, right? It should be El in Hebrew, and El doesn't always mean God. El actually also means mighty one, people who are bosses, people who are leaders, who are in power of the lands. And so Judah has married the daughter of a foreign god. Now, this is a bit difficult to recognize, mainly because Judah is a corporate entity. It's not an individual, right? It's a corporate entity. And he is now the husband of the daughter of a foreign god. So it could be understood as the daughter of a god or goddess, or a non-Jewish woman. That's why I have put here as option 1 or 2. That is a bit ambiguous, at least to myself. And that is something which we need to spend some time to look at the text. But it is about marrying or joining in a man-woman relationship, right? A man-woman relationship. In verse 12 continues that if this is the case, let the man who does this. And so now it is looking at the whole of Judah, relating to what God calls a profane act, right? A profane act. That if a man does this and he is aware of it, and yet he brings an offering to the Lord, it appears that he is considered defiled. And God is to cut off from the tents of Jacob. Now, cut off means to remove, right? To remove from this position. And if he brings an offering to the Lord, and by the Hebrew, that if he is a priest and he does that, then he shouldn't even become a priest anymore. Now, one of the conditions of the priesthood is that the Kohen and the Levites, especially the priests, is not supposed to marry anyone outside the 12 tribes of Israel. And that seems to be the call to chastisement right now. And God is serious that it's not just the normal ones that is doing it, but the priests who actually do it is a serious affair, because that completely violate God's rules. For example, in Leviticus chapter 21, in verse 13, says this, and this is the second thing you do. It has to do with within the tabernacle anyways. One is giving offering, and the other one is covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, with crying. Now let's take a look at this concept here. What is there to do with the covering of the altar of the Lord with tears, weeping, and crying? And this is about Judah, right? About Judah. So whenever we talk about Judah, there is the man and there is the woman. And with that, each of them has done something, right? One is to make the offering, and the other one is the weeping. Now, this whole idea comes to us this way, and in the text itself, it appears that the woman, and in this case would be the Jewish woman, comes to the Lord and the altar crying. Now, this idea of crying and sighing and groaning. And so let's take a look at the meaning of some of these words first. In verse 13, you find that there is tears, and I think this one is okay, whatever comes out of the eyes. And then we have weeping. Weeping is essentially overflowing with tears. Very much a slightly different nuance of crying again. And the final one is not really crying. It comes in the sense of lament, right? Of lament, of groaning. Now, all of these is really a very pitiful scene. And this is by the Jewish woman. Now, previously it's by the Jewish man. And worse still if that was a priest. And this is what God is looking at, that he will not regard the offering anymore, nor receive it with a good will from your hands. And with regards to the priest doing that, it is a very serious violation. Now, remember, this is about treachery, right? Treachery. Treachery means he's doing something that seems okay in front, but at the back, it is not okay. That is treachery. So you must have this in your mind, all right? And we will deal with verse 14 as our last verse for today. And then it says, yet you say, for what reason? Why isn't God receiving this? Again, remember the question in this section is about treachery. You have been treacherous because the Lord has been witness, right? Has been a witness, a person who will bear testimony. Between you and the wife of your youth. Between you. Now, the wife of your youth means married earlier. And what are we talking about now? It means that what is married earlier, now they marry again, right? They marry again. The daughter of a foreign L, right? A strange L means so a stranger, not an Israelite. And then he says, whom you have dealt treacherously. Now, the idea of treacherously, remember, doing wrong under the covers. Which means that they are pretending that everything is fine, but it is not. And that they are complying to God's rule, but they are not. And so the reminder of the wife of your youth means the Jewish wife that they had married earlier, which should be the case because all Levites are supposed, the priests are supposed to marry only from the natives, right? The 12 tribes of Israel, not outside. Yet she is your companion. Now, the idea of a companion in verse 14 is a word that is, how should we say, it's not a normally used word. This is somebody who is binded together. So it's not an English word companion like a friend. It is somebody who is binded together as a couple, right? It's in a couple form, binded together. And then it says, and your wife. The word here is not wife, by the way. The word here is woman. Woman by covenant, right? Now, it's not woman by covenant. Again, unfortunately, the translation is a bit tricky here. A woman of your covenant, right? Not by covenant. A woman of your covenant. Remember, there is a covenant of Levi that we were talking about at the earlier verses of chapter 2. And as we go on here, the Levites, the priests themselves, have married outside and a foreigner, a non-Jewish woman, and pretends that everything is okay while he is mistreating the wife of your youth, married earlier. Okay, so that is a picture. And so doing, we have an A and a B here. And this is the covenant of Levi, that you are supposed to take a wife of the people and not the daughter of a foreigner. And she has been binded together. And so this is an official capacity and role that the man and the woman has. Why did you become a Baal of a daughter of a strange El or a foreign person, right? A foreign dignitary, right? And so that is the accusation that God has against the priests. And so I suppose it would be relevant for us to remember Leviticus chapter 21, I guess. Let me just write this down, right? Read Leviticus chapter 21 about the priests, right? About the priests. What they are supposed to do, who they are supposed to marry, and they are not supposed to profane himself and not supposed to profane God. He's not supposed to treat the name of God as common. He's not supposed to treat this covenant they have with God as common, right? And that is what the profane here is talking about. And so this would be important for us to have a better understanding that this is talking about Judah, and in Judah, talking about the priesthood. Now, the people marrying others is already bad enough, because at the time of Ezra, we find that at the end chapter of the book of Ezra, they dealt with this issue where people had married women from Babylon. And so they had to send them back in that sense, because when they are there serving God in the temple, they're not supposed to do that. And hence that whole concept actually dovetails into this segment of treachery, meaning mistreating the wife of your youth while treating the daughter of a foreigner much better. And the wife of your youth are coming to God right here in tears and bringing the case to God, showing that why is she being mistreated. And that is the whole picture here. And God is telling them that this cannot be so. This cannot be so. As a priest, you should already know how to deal with this situation before God. Now, we would actually come to this part and we'll temporarily take a break here. We'll continue on Monday, but before we get there, I suppose that it will do us good if we could read Leviticus chapter 21. And with this, we come to the end of our session for today.